right, we ready?
Yeah.
Count how many? Somebody gonna keep track?
Okay.
I want to see who the winner is here. Winning table gets bags of Sun Chips. Was the first Catholic diocese in the United States, where everything began. The whole United States was one diocese, one area.
New York.
Baltimore. Good for them.
I had New England.
Baltimore was the beginnings of the Catholic Church in America.
Wow.
And if you go there today, they will remind you of that incessantly. I went to a conference in Baltimore a couple of years ago. Every time they say the word Baltimore, Diocese, Archdiocese of Baltimore, they follow it up with the premier see, because they're the first, and they want you to know that they're the first. My brother lives in the Diocese of Baltimore, so I was teasing him, I'm like, you're part of the premier see. He's like, that's right. So they take that very seriously. What is the Archdiocese of Ohio? Those are the 6 dioceses of Ohio. There are only 6. Those are them. Which one is the Archdiocese? Cincinnati. And that simply means it was the first in the area. All of the state of Ohio was one diocese.
You were right about it. Yeah, you just said.
What year was the Diocese of Cleveland established? You got 99 guesses. Who's the closest?
35.
1815? Over here.
35.
35?
36.
47. 1847. We just celebrated about 20 years ago in 1997 the sesquicentennial of the diocese, the 150th anniversary. Thank you. Who is the Diocese of Cleveland's first bishop?
We have Amadeus Rapids.
Amadeus Rapp. Very good. Amadeus Rapp is a French.
Don't get slapped again.
You redeemed yourself on that.
What are the 2 major immigrant groups to Cleveland Diocese in its earliest days?
Germans and Irish.
Hungarian and Polish.
Polish and Slavic.
Nice and loud.
Germans and the Irish.
Germans and the Irish. Germans and the Irish.
Okay, we still love ya.
The Irish were the sophisticated, the Germans were the skilled workers who came to work in the steel mills and places like that. Number 6, what was the name of or where was the first cathedral in the Diocese of Cleveland? Anybody but Tina know this one?
Great.
What's that one we visited?
No, it's not that. It's not the cathedral, St. John the Evangelist, which is our present cathedral. Anybody? No?
What's that one we visited?
St. Stan's.
Yeah.
It's not it. Tina?
It was in the inner city, but I can't, like west.
Third.
You can be proud to say that the Catholic diocese began with a little church in the Flats, St. Mary of the Flats. All right, right in the middle of Party District, and now where they're building all kinds of hotels and everything, that was where the Catholic Church got started, the Flats.
Still there?
What's there now?
No, nothing.
What was the name of it?
I think it was the West Bank of the Flats. Probably.
Oh, and it's gone? I mean, there's nothing.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
It's like
What is the oldest parish community? That does not mean the oldest church, because they didn't actually have a church. They were just a group of people that got together in an empty building or someone's house. The oldest community.
St. Peter's of Paul.
Peter and Paul Doylestown.
Doylestown, 1827.
You're
It wasn't a
right.
church, so.
1827, St. Peter and Paul Doylestown.
You ever been to
You don't
Doylestown?
listen to me, guys.
No.
It's like a throwback. You go in there, it's just a real
Yeah.
old town.
What major Catholic event took place in the Diocese of Cleveland in 1935? Since I know none of you were alive to be there for it. Anybody? Anybody?
The Pope come?
We made national news. It was a huge worldwide thing.
wasn't it a conference?
The Eucharistic Congress, the 7th National Eucharistic Congress. Which bishop of Cleveland had the longest tenure or episcopate here in the diocese?
Pilla.
Hoban, Pilla. Over here.
Amadeus.
Pilla.
Amadeus.
Pilla at 26 years, Amadeus Rapp at 25 years.
Wow, very good.
James Hickey, the shortest one, at 6 years. And, oh, I just cannot wait here. Where do we go for historical data about the Diocese of Cleveland?
Michael.
We all get a point.
There we go.
Hurry up on that one.
That's answer number 8. Okay, so we have a diocesan archives. We have records dating all the way back to the 1800s down at the Diocese of Cleveland. That's one place to look. Where else can we look?
Google.
Google's not going to have any of this.
Wasn't Father Ed there for all of them?
What other diocese would have an archives that we would be a part of? I already talked about it. Cincinnati, since that was the Archdiocese of Ohio. So the beginnings of the Diocese of Cleveland, those records would be in the archives in Cincinnati. There is another place which we've already mentioned on the East Coast, the Premier See. Baltimore would have record of Cleveland.
The Vatican.
The Vatican, yes, the propagation of the faith. Before the Diocese of the United States existed, we were a mission territory. So as a mission territory, we fell under the propagation of the faith in Rome. So they would have the beginnings of the United States as a mission territory. One more thing, just kind of shut down. I know we've talked about it. It was around for about 150 years up until last October. You all should be getting the newest version in your mailbox.
Newspaper.
Catholic Universe Bulletin, right? We have a newspaper that's 150 years old, and all of that is on microfilm that you can look at. All of those newspapers going back to the 1800s. One other interesting thing, Notre Dame University in South Bend. Notre Dame had the bright idea, not so bright idea, that was sarcasm. They said, let's be the archives for the entire United States. And so they wrote Notre Dame, beautiful library, Touchdown Jesus, right? And they wrote to every bishop, and they said, send us all your archives so we can keep them at the University of Notre Dame.
Oh my gosh.
Most bishops are like, are you kidding me? Some sent them. Okay, so, and Cleveland did send some stuff to the University of Notre Dame, not everything. Hence, nobody has ever gotten them back from the University of Notre Dame, and all those who did send them their archives are kicking themselves now, because now they're at Notre Dame. And there's one more, which I'll get to in just a second. There's another place the archives is, so very fascinating stuff. Okay. Prehistory of the Diocese of Cleveland here. Baltimore was the beginning of our diocese here in the United States, 1789, and Baltimore was split into 4 areas, 4 dioceses: Boston, Philadelphia, New York, and look at this whopping major metropolis, Bardstown, Kentucky. At the time this was divided up, Bardstown, Kentucky, they thought was going to be the booming center of the West. It amounted to nothing more than Doylestown, probably. That diocese was transferred to Louisville a little bit later. And so when it was Bardstown, the Diocese of Bardstown actually went all the way up from Kentucky through Ohio, up into Michigan, Wisconsin, everything that was considered the West, okay, up until that point. In 1821, Cincinnati broke away from Bardstown, so the state of Ohio became one diocese, and that was Cincinnati, so it's called the Archdiocese. Simply means it's the first diocese in an area. So the person who becomes the bishop of Cincinnati would automatically get the title of Archbishop, because he is the bishop of an archdiocese. Doesn't mean he's any better than the Bishop of Cleveland, it just means he was appointed to a place that's called an archdiocese. So in 1821, Diocese Cincinnati was founded, Bishop Pierce Purcell, and shortly thereafter, by the 1830s, he started to realize that Ohio was becoming very populated and could easily be split into 2. So he began to petition Baltimore, the bishops, to ask for Ohio to be split. He gave a couple of suggestions. It was chosen to be Cleveland. And in 1847, Pope Pius IX divided Ohio into Cincinnati in the south, Cleveland in the north. It was a very arbitrary decision. They went right along the line there in the middle of the state, and they cut through the state of Ohio, which means counties were cut through, cities were cut through, half was Cleveland, half was Cincinnati, and the dividing line even went through somebody's house. So you could live in two dioceses in one place. Bishop Purcell and Bishop Rapp then went through. They took that dividing line and they divided those counties. If the majority of the county was to the north, it became part of Cleveland. If the majority of the county was to the south, it became part of Cincinnati. The only one was Holmes County, which was perfectly split in the middle. They argued over that for a long time, and this was a big deal because priests are assigned to a diocese. So if a diocese splits into two, that means priests are going to now be relocated. So this was a big thing. The priests in Holmes County were allowed to choose which one they wanted to be, and eventually when Columbus was carved out of the middle of the state, Holmes County was part of that, and so it wasn't an issue anymore. So that's how we got divided in 1847. Bishop Louis Amadeus Rapp came from France, came to the United States to be a missionary, came here at the age of 39. The average life expectancy was 37. All right, so he had already outlived his prime. Came here as a missionary because he wanted to work among the what he thought were going to be the Indians. He ended up in northern Ohio, and he was working with the Germans and the Irish who were building the Erie Canal. And so there was a lot of laborers that were working in the Toledo area and across northern Ohio, building that canal, and he was ministering to them. They were known for being a bunch of pretty rowdy, rough people, you know, drunks, if you will, and all kinds of other things. And they sent this missionary priest to go work with them. So he wanted to work with Native American Indians, and he got to work with drunks in Toledo instead. So that was Bishop Amadeus Rapp. He was here for 25 years as our bishop. I just said all that. He was actually consecrated bishop in Cincinnati by his good friend Bishop Purcell. In 1847, when he took over the Diocese of Cleveland, this was our first church. St. Mary of the Flats was the only church, okay, at the time. You see, he had 21 priests, 43, I have churches in quotes because those were communities, like St. Peter and Paul in Doylestown was a community. Within a few years, St. Mary in Hudson was a community, and we are celebrating over 150 years. So churches just meant groups of people. These 21 priests would ride their horse from place to place. These are pretty rough guys. If you ever looked at those pictures over there on the history wall, I mean, these guys had to ride around on a weekend on a horse through the wilderness of Ohio to go from one community to another to say Mass. So chances are very good that they carried a shotgun with them and ammunition, and they didn't shave and they didn't take care of themselves. And these are pretty rugged guys. The joke in one of the videos I have was if you heard a rustling in the woods in the back, you would get your gun out. You would either think it was a bear or a Catholic priest. So that's what these guys did.
Where is that? Do you know where that was physically located in the
I
flats?
said I think it was on the West Bank.
In the West Bank, okay.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, I'm almost positive of that, but I mean, it was in that short little area there. And then we had about 10,000 Catholics in 1847. St. Mary's Parish in Hudson was founded by our first bishop, Amadeus Rapp, 1859. And Eugene M. O'Callahan was appointed its first pastor. His picture is over on that history wall. He is very notorious in the diocese, and he was instrumental in the downfall of Bishop Amadeus Rapp. So we can claim that our first pastor brought down the first bishop of the Diocese of Cleveland. The old church of St. Mary's was located on the square. It's still there today. It's that white one next to the funeral home. It's now some Christian meditation room or something like that.
It'll change, wait a week.
What's that?
Wait a week, it'll change.
1954, land was purchased here. 1970, where we are sitting was the church, okay? And from what I understand, are we under the middle here? Anybody who remembers? the old church, or no? Was it, wherever that little skylight, I think. it's
Over
right
there in that room.
In the other room.
Yeah, something
That
like
they-
that. That was where the altar was, and the pews were over here or something. I can't picture it.
Yeah, I think so. Hope we had a first communion in the church. but remember
Yeah, and
when
that's
you
why
came
we
in
built
on
that
the
mezzanine to
side?
make use of all that empty space.
Mm.
It's right next door there. 1995 is when our present church was dedicated. Has not been, nothing's been done to it since major until 2016 when we witnessed the big renovation that's going to be unveiled here in a couple weeks and what the inside is going to look like. So we're 21 years overdue there for an updating.
How does the priest take down a bishop?
Oh, we'll get to that. Good stuff. If you stop asking me questions so I can keep talking.
Sorry.
By 1870, Cleveland was established as an industrial city. Lots of immigrants. By 1880, we get the new wave of immigrants from Eastern Europe. We start to see the Polish and the Slovaks and the Hungarians and the Bohemians and all of those Eastern European groups coming to Cleveland. By 1870, we've gone from 21 to 117 priests. We've gone up to 160 churches, most of them actual buildings by this point, just in those first 30 years. 90 churches have an attached school. We have several religious communities. The Little Sisters of the Poor were one of the first. They actually just pulled out of the Diocese of Cleveland about a year ago. So they still exist in the United States, but no longer in the Diocese of Cleveland. We had one seminary in 1870. It was at the bishop's residence in the Flats. The seminarians all got to live with the bishop. How exciting. And their school building was the horses' stables right next door. So that's where they were trained to become priests. We started hospitals and charitable institutions. By this point we've gone from 10,000 to 100,000 Catholics by 1870. Well, history, here's our present day cathedral. Bishop Rapp purchased land in the country on East 9th and Superior because it was all the way across the river. People did not want to have to go all the way across the river and through the woods into the country to get to the cathedral. Today, the Flats, it's like a 8-minute walk, right? Because, I mean, it's really not that far, but East 9th Street was the country back then. This is our cathedral at East 9th and Superior. The cornerstone was laid in 1848, so right after we became a diocese, Bishop Rapp got to work on building the cathedral. The first Mass was celebrated, and then in 1850 he went over to France to beg for money. He went down to Cincinnati to beg for money, and he was able to get enough money to complete the cathedral. So it took 4 years to build, so in 1852 our current cathedral was done. They added the rectory, the chancery building. 1946 to 48 they completely gutted the place, blew out the wall, made it twice as big. In 1977, they renovated the inside after the changes to Vatican II. They brought the altar forward. They, took out the communion rail, did a bunch of other interior decorating things. 1988, they actually got a set of working real bells at the cathedral, beautiful bells that it took them many years to fundraise for. And in 1997, I got to witness as I was working there, the sacristy was renovated under Bishop Hill. It's a beautiful sacristy now. This goes to show you a little bit about that reconstruction. Like I said, they blew out one whole end of the cathedral. It was a massive, almost rebuilding of the cathedral. This is what it looks like from the outside today. The holy doors are right there in the middle, so if you go down and visit them, hopefully they're open, unlike when Mike was there and the bishop went to open the doors and they didn't open, but the holy doors are there in the middle, so you have to enter from East 9th if you want to see the holy doors. This is a view from the choir loft at the back. You can see it was decorated for Easter at the time. This is the interior of the cathedral with the sanctuary up there in the front. The cathedral has these big columns, huge pillars. There's a lot of bad seating in the cathedral if you get stuck behind one of the pillars because you can't see. And above that is walkways above the ceiling. That's how they change the lights. And underneath, there's walkways underneath the cathedrals too. It's pretty cool what's down there. Here's a closer view of the sanctuary. As you see, it's decorated for Easter. That big thing in the back is called the wooden reredos. And there are something about 50 statues, and I want to say, I'm not keeping up with my pages, 850 hand-carved pieces of Appalachian oak, which make up that big thing back there. The main figure at the top is, 850 pieces. The main figure at the top in the middle is St. John. That's who the cathedral is dedicated to, one of the evangelists. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are right underneath them. Peter and Paul are up there as well. There's Mary and Joseph on the two sides, and there's about 30 angels in there as well.
Was that put in renovation at some point, or was that originally?
I think it was pretty original. This is the bishop's chair called the cathedra. That's where we get the word cathedral. The cathedral is the chair of the bishop. And so only when Bishop Lennon says Mass does somebody sit in that chair. That is his coat of arms there on the back. When we get a new bishop, that coat of arms will change, and that will be his chair. So when we went down there, because Bishop Lennon was not there, Father Wu celebrated, he sat in a chair that was much closer and off to the side. Comical little story, when I was working down there, my friend, the maintenance guy, Alfonso, I call him a crazy Dominican, he barely spoke English, crazy little guy, but we were walking through the cathedral one night, and he went up and sat in the bishop's chair, and he's like swinging his leg. Bishop Pilla comes walking from the chapel where he was praying, and he's like, "You're sitting in my chair." This is the ambo. There's a few steps where the priest has to go up into the ambo to proclaim the gospel and preach from. That is St. Stephen on the front. He's the first martyr of the church. He was known for his wisdom, his eloquence, and the way he was able to teach people. And he was killed by being stoned to death, so he's holding stones and a palm branch. So that's St. Stephen on the front. The altar itself, that marble slab on the top, the marble on the top itself, it's about this thick, weighs 1,400 pounds. It's a single piece of Italian marble at 1,400 pounds, supported by 4 pillars on the side, which the flowers are covering. Those are all marble as well. And then the relief that is on the front of it, I have the close-up picture there, is an image of the pelican. The pelican has been an ancient symbol of the Eucharist, because when the pelican is in desperate need, it will feed its young by tearing off its own flesh and giving it to its young. So it's a symbol of the Eucharist, Christ giving us his body and blood to feed us. We have a pelican here at St. Mary's, and it's over in those stained glass windows where the tabernacle used to be. It's etched in there, and there's a few red drops you can see to show the pelican's blood. So you'll find the pelican in many churches throughout the world because of that symbolism. This is over to the side. This is the corner that we were stuck in. It's called Mary's Chapel. You can see there's a nice statue to Mary there. People go and pray. They light candles and things like that. Beautiful little area dedicated to Mary. Right on either side of these are the confessionals. The cathedral has 5 masses a day, every day of the week. They have confessions 3 times a day, every day of the week, because they're serving the downtown community. And so it's very interesting to see during the noon hour, they have Mass at 12:10, because if your lunch starts at 12, you got 10 minutes to get over to the cathedral. So Mass starts then, and confessions also go from 11:30 to 12:30. So you've got people in line for confession, you got Mass going on, you got people coming in and out, praying and leaving. It's like a circus, really, what's going on. Some people are waiting in line for confession, and then it's time for communion. They jump in line, get back in line for confession. It's kind of goofy, but that's the cathedral.
It's great that it's that busy.
Yes.
I think it's terrific.
Well, for Mass, there may only be like 50 people there, but
Yeah.
it's open every day, and there's
That's
things going on.
awesome.
This is what's called the Resurrection Chapel. This is over to the side. This is where I said is the cemetery. This is where the bishops are buried. The bishops of the diocese are buried here in this little crypt, this little cemetery. There's a gate there. And this is what it looks like on the inside, which we didn't get to see because there was a bunch of equipment in there. Again, it's absolutely beautiful. That whole ceiling is all Venetian glass, little pieces that are placed. I mean, it's just gorgeous. The panels that you see around the tabernacle behind the risen Christ, as well as all the pillars and everything, that came from the old bishop's residence in Bracknell. The bishop used to have like a little palace of his own, which the diocese sold, and so that came here and is now in this chapel. And then in the middle there is what Noah was so excited about, the bones of St. Christine, which kind of looks like a little fireplace, which is really creepy. But St. Christine was a martyr from the 300s, and we were one of, when we received these as a gift from Pius the 11th in 1928. We were only the second diocese in the United States that had a complete set of relics. St. Pat's in New York City was the other one, and so they were stolen at one point in time from the cathedral. Somehow they were recovered, and now it is behind glass. But it's pretty cool to see that. Even from where we were about 15 feet outside the gate, you can still see it. You can, if you're in the inside, you can read all the inscriptions of the bishops that are buried there. But you have to be inside to see that. This is the tabernacle, which is over to the right, and above it is a big gold monstrosity thing. No, it's very pretty. It's supposed to represent the pillar of fire that guided the Israelites through the desert. God's presence was a pillar, a cloud by day, and a pillar of fire by night. And so God's presence in the tabernacle at the cathedral has this big gold, what's supposed to be a pillar of flame kind of above that. There's a view of the choir loft in the back. So this is the part of the cathedral that's facing East 9th Street. All right, so here's the Irish. You want to find out how our pastor took down the first bishop. The Irish kind of took over the cathedral when it was built. They had a large population that was living right there around the heart of the cathedral, so that became their church. And so the Germans who were here didn't want to go there, right? Because if the Irish are going to church there, then we can't be bothered to go to church there. We're going to want our own church, okay? And so the cathedral became like the church for the Irish. Bishop Rapp hated the Irish, though. The Irish were stubborn people. When the Irish came here as priests, they would refuse to learn the language English. And so they would not be able to be assigned to other parishes. They only wanted to be in Irish parishes. They only wanted to speak in the language. And so Bishop Rapp did not like the Irish at all. Eventually over on Bridge Avenue, which is now Ohio City, they built St. Patrick's, beautiful church. It's like the headquarters of the Irish in Cleveland. So you had the cathedral on the east side of the river. You had St. Patrick on Bridge Avenue on the west side of the river. St. Vincent's in Akron, the Irish that were down in this area started that church. St. Mary's in Hudson here in 1859. St. Augustine's, we hear about them every year at Thanksgiving. They're the ones that serve all those thousands of meals. That was predominantly an Irish parish in the Tremont area. So the Irish Catholics who moved south from the cathedral, who went to Tremont, they now have St. Augustine's. And then St. Malachy's is right at the top of the flats, right by, what is that, the Detroit Superior Bridge, and West 25th, St. Malachy's there. There's another major Irish church. And then they have another one down at Immaculate Conception, East 65th and Superior. It was that big church. The Germans took over Lorain County, as well as they were on the outskirts, so they were not centered around the cathedral, downtown area. So because the Irish were there and they didn't like the Irish, they wanted their own church. So 7 blocks down from the cathedral, you have historic St. Peter's Church. Beautiful church, one of the earliest churches of the diocese. That was the German, they considered that their cathedral. So you have these 2 beautiful churches a couple blocks away. The Irish go here, the Germans go there. Never the two shall meet. So St. Peter's, we were just down there the other day, and I pointed out the historic St. Peter's Church, still there. Not really run by Germans anymore. St. Mary's was opened for the Germans who wanted to be on the west side. And actually, it was torn down. It's part of St. Ignatius High School's campus now. So right where St. Ignatius is, the Germans had another parish there. They went further west to St. Stephen's on West 54th, probably the second most beautiful church in all of the Diocese of Cleveland, in my humble opinion. St. Stephen's, beautiful, beautiful German church. Ever get the chance, go to St. Stephen's. And because the Irish had St. Vincent's in Akron, the Germans wanted to build a bigger church, so they built St. Bernard's in Akron. And so, again, here in Akron, the Irish and Germans didn't want to deal with each other, and they both were angry at who had the bigger church. So these things are a competition. Bishop Rapp's legacy, he set the Cleveland on a firm institutional basis. The Irish priests, they had it out for him, and so the leader of the pack was Eugene O'Callahan from St. Mary's here in Hudson, as well as a few of his buddies. While Bishop Rapp was over in Europe for the First Vatican Council at 1870, they took over his confessional at the cathedral, and so the people that would regularly come to Bishop Rapp for confession now were coming to some of these other Irish priests who were looking for a way to do him in, and so they coerced confessions out of women that Bishop Rapp was inappropriate in the confessional. Some of these, they told them they would not absolve their sins. They told them they would be excommunicated from the church if they didn't sign this document. They didn't tell them what was in the document. They just said, here, sign it. Most of all of them retracted that once they realized what had actually happened. But the Irish priests got their way. Bishop Rapp, while he was over at Vatican I, his buddies were like, why don't you not go back to Cleveland? Turn in your resignation, because this was a big debacle. So he did. They said, don't go back to Cleveland. So a month later, he arrives in Cleveland. And the Irish priests were even more furious that he came back. They pretty much ran him out of town. He left to go be a missionary. He died 7 years later, and his body was brought back to Cleveland. But the Irish got their way, and Bishop Rapp was publicly, disgracefully dismissed from Cleveland, if you will. Our next bishop is Bishop Gilmore, and so what the Vatican did was they said, okay, we're not going to send an Irish guy there, so they sent Bishop Gilmore, and he was hated equally by everybody. He kind of didn't like anybody; they didn't like him. The priests used to say that he was a plague to be endured. So that's what his own priest thought of him. He was the one who had to deal with all these new waves of immigrants, like the Polish and the Slavics and the Hungarians and all of them, so he had to kind of deal with that. He didn't like the Irish or the German priests because, again, they wouldn't learn the language, they wouldn't go to these parishes, so he had to find priests to minister to the Polish and to the Slovaks and all the others. There are lots of churches. If you go down Superior Avenue, every 10 blocks there's another Catholic church. Each one was a nationality. You have St. Casimir's, the Polish church. You have St. Peter's, the German church. You had the Cathedral, which was the Irish church. I mean, it just goes. Immaculate Conception was an Irish church. All the way out to Case Western, every 10 blocks there's another Catholic church because these cultures could not get along with each other. He was the one who began the Catholic Universe Bulletin. We started some hospitals. He brought in some religious orders that are still here today. The Notre Dames, the Ursulines, the Jesuits. St. Ignatius High School began, and then they moved out to the Rich Heights, and they built John Carroll University, and so they had their high school and their university, the Jesuits. Next bishop, Bishop Horstmann. Good German, right? And so now we get a German bishop. Guess who's not going to like him?
The Irish.
The Irish, very good. Guess who is going to like him? The Germans. Yeah. Horstmann founded 30 new parishes for these immigrants. Again, he didn't do much to help this Irish-German thing. This is still a big problem. All kinds of fantastic stories about the Irish and the Germans and how they kept fighting, and it was crazy. Good stuff. So he favored the Germans, and he appointed a non-Irish auxiliary bishop, so that really ticked off the Irish. Here we go, John Patrick Farrelly. Good Irishman, right?
Irish.
Who's he going to like?
The Irish.
The Irish. Who's he going to hate? The Germans. See? You're catching on. Pretty good. This was the heyday for the Irish in Cleveland. This was also the time that the Diocese of Toledo was split. He was actually the bishop of both dioceses. He began our Catholic charities. He centralized Catholic schools. He built new parishes, and he purchased new land for the cathedral. He wanted to build a new cathedral, and that land is now present-day Severance Hall. And so the diocese owned that land. Bishop Fairley did not do anything with it. The next bishop is going to decide, no, we're going to stay put on East 9th and Superior. So we sold that property to Case Western. We were able to get more money by selling it than by building a cathedral there. The negatives, nobody liked him because he was one of those Roman guys, went to school at the North American College. So the Pope was trying at this time to establish in many dioceses guys who are good, faithful to Rome, guys that were educated in Rome, and so they all came out of kind of the same mold during this time. So the United States was populated by a lot of these bishops that nobody really liked because they were these Roman guys who came in and thought, well, I'm better than everybody else. And so usually a bishop is chosen or suggested, nominated by the priests and other bishops in the area. These guys were not. They were direct appointments by the Pope because of their status and where they went to school. Bishop Joseph Schrems, one of our greatest bishops, was given the honorary title Archbishop. So he was not the bishop of an archdiocese, because Cleveland is not one, but because of the good things he did, he was given the honorary title. Some strong things he did: he was a stable bishop, he accomplished much. He was the one who made the decision to leave the cathedral where it was, sell the property to Case Western. He organized the National Catholic War Council, which would eventually disband but become the National Conference of Catholic Bishops, which was now under the new title, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. So the organization that is the governing structure of bishops, he was the one who began, and they actually met at the bishop's residence in Bracknell here in Cleveland when they would have their meetings. And here's a picture of him. You see the NCWC, the National Catholic War Council, and he was instrumental in that. Going back, I have, he was the bishop during the Great Depression. He was a very smart man. He used some of the diocese's resources. He bought land everywhere in Northeast Ohio at dirt cheap prices. Everybody was trying to make a buck during the Great Depression. He says, I'm going to scoop up as much land as I could. He got it very cheap just to hold on to it. And we're going to see Bishop Hoban, who was known as the great builder of the diocese. Hoban built parishes everywhere. It was because Schrems bought the land 10 or 20 years earlier during the Depression. We always used to like to tell the story as well at the seminary that in order to save money, he would buy what was called train wreck food. So when a train would derail and a whole thing of food would get destroyed, he would buy it dirt cheap and serve it at the seminary. And so that was how he saved money. So we used to laugh that we were still eating the train wreck food in the seminary. Good guy, saved money. One of the things he did, do you mind if I go over by about 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
Oh, no, go ahead, this is good.
You have to leave, you can. He was instrumental on the large scale, and so he brought the National Eucharistic Congress here to Cleveland in 1935. Let me give you some of these statistics. These are just fantastic. If you think about it, this is 1935, so they do not have the technology that we have. All right, so in 1934, he was appointed by the bishops in charge of this Eucharistic League. The plans fell through for where the Congress was going to be held the next year, so he volunteered Cleveland. So think of all the planning we are doing for the Republican National Convention this year. This is what this guy had to pull off in 1 year for Cleveland to host people from all over the country to come here. And so he offered that site for the following year. He announces in 1935 that 10 months from now, Cleveland is going to host this National Catholic Conference. The brother of Mayor Davis offered Public Hall and Cleveland Municipal Stadium for the whopping rental price of $1 for him to rent for those events. Mayor Davis gave him $1,000 of his own money for his efforts. He did fundraising through national organizations, societies, local businesses, individual patrons, schools, you name it. If there was a group in the diocese, he would have them do bake sales, anything they could to raise another dollar to bring this Congress to Cleveland. The theme was the Holy Eucharist, the source and inspiration of all Catholic theology. Public Hall was the center. They had perpetual adoration at Public Hall. during the entire 3 days of this conference. Cleveland Municipal Stadium was used for the major events. It had just opened in 1931, so Cleveland Stadium was only 4 years old at the time. Cleveland Stadium had no PA system, so they had to bring in a PA system so that people could hear. It had no lights, so it had to bring in portable lights. Again, this is 1935. We think these things, we can make them happen like this. 1935, these were major things. They put up a microphone system en route from Public Hall to the stadium. So when they would have these big processions each day, they would have microphone things going on, and then people could know what's happening en route, which is pretty cool. He got every school involved. Schools were shut down. All the kids were down there. They would be in the parades. Teachers, societies, groups, like everybody was down there for these parades. And this was like, this shut down the city, okay, in terms of Catholic life. He liked it because it sent a message to Protestant America. We are Catholics. This began, Cardinal Hayes was the delegate of the Pope who arrived at Cleveland Terminal on September 23rd. That evening, they had a message from President Roosevelt. There were 20,000 people gathered at Public Hall, so the president addressed them from Washington, which is pretty cool. Tuesday, September 24th, was the actual beginning. Mass in Public Hall, the choir alone had 8,000 people in the choir. The Blessed Sacrament was exposed in Public Hall for adoration. There were 40,000 people in Municipal Stadium, and Fulton Sheen gave the opening address. On Wednesday, September 25th, 40,000 school children were in the procession in the Mass to the stadium. That evening's Mass was at full capacity, Cleveland Municipal Stadium. They had 2,000 priests alone. The stadium was filled with over 100,000 people, 30,000 on the outside. And this is the old stadium. This is, on record, the largest crowd ever gathered at Municipal Stadium. So we beat out all the sporting events for years to come. Pretty cool. On Thursday, September 26th, there was the closing. 50,000 people gathered for morning mass at the stadium. 22,000 marchers marched in procession. 1,000 flower girls, representatives, seminarians, altar boys, women religious priests. The cardinal, who was the representative of the Pope, was carrying the monstrance. All these people...
Carrying a what?
The monstrance with the Eucharist. He carried it from Public Hall to the stadium. And then all these people that marched in procession came out into the stadium, and they formed a living monstrance on the field. And then this was really cool, was that, again, 1935 technology, Pope Pius XI addressed the crowd from Rome. So that's pretty cool. For 1930s. Here's a short, minute video clip about what was going on.
Tens of thousands of devout Roman Catholics attend the American Eucharistic Congress at Cleveland, Ohio, which is to be addressed by His Holiness the Pope, speaking from Italy through the Vatican shortwave broadcasting station. As the choir raises its voice in a hymn of praise, 20,000 people form this living monstrance, the vessel in which the host is exhibited for adoration. And now all are waiting for the voice of the Pope through the loudspeakers.
That's pretty cool. That was Pope Pius XI from the Vatican addressing people in Cleveland, Ohio. In 1943, this is what the Diocese of Cleveland looks like. Still has that today, the same 8 counties of the diocese. You can see we're in that far corner there, Summit County. The diocese is broken up into districts. So there are 14 districts in the Diocese of Cleveland. Next, Bishop Hoban. I said he was known for his great building. He also was given the title Archbishop because of all the great things he did. He was only able to build so much because Schrems bought all that land dirt cheap. Tremendous growth, 400,000 to almost 900,000 Catholics in 20 years. He opened 60 new parishes, 60 parishes that had schools. He opened a college seminary, Borromeo College Seminary, in 1953. And in 1991, St. Mary's Seminary, which was down on Ansel Road in Cleveland, moved out to Wycliffe to join Borromeo Seminary. It's now called the Center for Pastoral Leadership. So both of our seminaries are in one building since 1991, and that is out in Wycliffe. Hoban, during the end of his life, was not doing good on his health. John Kroll, the guy that was mentioned there, went on to become the Cardinal Archbishop of Philadelphia. Cardinal Kroll was famous in the United States, came from Cleveland. Bishop Clarence Iseman was bishop during the 1960s, early 70s. He had the illustrious job of implementing all the changes of Vatican II, which ticked off many people. This was an era, also Humani Vitae came out in 1968. Lots of priests were leaving the priesthood, lots of religious were leaving religious life, lots of Catholics were leaving the Catholic Church. He was not a good organizer. The St. Ladislas thing was funny. St. Ladislas was a church over on the east side. In 1970, it was scheduled to close, but fire burned it down. And so the insurance paid $425,000. And they said, if you build another St. Ladislas church, anywhere, doesn't matter where, if you build another St. Ladislas church within 2 years, so that date would be September 1st, 1973, you would get another $325,000. Well, Iseman kind of sat on that and never did anything with it. And so it was Monsignor Quinn at the time, who became Bishop Quinn, in July of 1973 realized that if they didn't start building a church named St. Ladislas in 2 months, we were losing out on $325,000. So what Bishop Quinn did is he found the plans for the most recent church which was built, which was St. Eugene's in Cuyahoga Falls. He took those plans and he replicated them in Westlake. So we now have a St. Ladislas church in Westlake, and it is identical to St. Eugene's church in Cuyahoga Falls. They started in July. They had 2 months to break ground on a building. On August 15th, as they obviously did not survey this land very well, they ran into a capped gas well, and luckily the plans fell 2 feet short of the gas line, and they were allowed to continue. Otherwise, it would have been held up by legal processes for who knows how long. On August 28th, Father Thomas Cullen laid the first brick, and they had 3 days to spare because the brick was laid in Westlake. St. Ladislas Church still exists today. Bishop James Hickey was only here for 6 years. Look, we're in color now. Isn't that exciting? He established our mission in El Salvador, so we now have a presence there, which is staffed by diocesan priests. He eventually went on to become the Cardinal Archbishop of Washington, D.C., which is where he was until he died in the 90s. And Bishop Anthony Pilla was bishop for 26 years, an Italian guy. See, we're back to color. Isn't that exciting? Pilla's legacy, he began the lay ecclesial ministry program, of which I'm the proud product of. We're one of the few dioceses that have such an organized process for people like me to go through training to do what I do. He began that. He also began the Church in the City initiative, which partnered inner city parishes with suburban parishes to try to revive them. This was the initial plan before we got to the point of having to close churches. He says, let's try to work together to revive churches, and because that didn't really work too well, it was a great plan, but it didn't work as well as he thought. His negative legacy, a lot of toleration, a lot of things went on in the diocese, and the whole clergy sex abuse scandal kind of blew up under his watch. He was part of all the bishops shuffling things under the rug, because that's what they were all doing. So we have Bishop Richard Lennon, 2006 to today. There he is. What a young picture he was there. He's got a lot more gray hair now. He's been through quite a bit. His legacy, he did come in, he did clean up the sex abuse scandal. All of those issues were resolved. We've made a lot of positive changes, a lot of steps forward in terms of transparency and how we deal with the secular law. I mean, just a lot of good things have happened. He did shut down or renewed the seminary programs, the diaconate, and the lay ecclesial ministry programs. Rooted in faith, right after he closed parishes, The diocese says you're crazy to ask for money, and he did, and we got over, I think it's, how many billion, $3 billion that we collected or something like that in the diocese, which was a tremendous, they far surpassed their goal. That was a few years ago. That is what's funding our new renovation of our church as well as the doors. So thank you to all of you that donated money to Rooted in Faith. The new church is because of you. And what he's going to be remembered for negatively is the church closings and being forced to reopen them. At one point, not too many years ago, we had 4 bishops. Bishop Roger Grease, who's now retired, Bishop Quinn, who is now deceased, and Bishop Pevick is also deceased. So we have 1 active bishop. Under Pillow, we actually had 5 active bishops, so we've gone from 5 to 1. He has asked Rome for many times for new bishops, and they're so far behind, we're so far down on the list that we don't have any.